There's a quiet fraud happening in how we use the word leadership. It's everywhere. Meetings, books, classes, training programs, entire departments built around it. Leadership. Everyone insists it's important. Everyone claims to be developing it. Everyone notices when it's missing. But here's the uncomfortable part. What most people are calling leadership isn't leadership. It's confidence, visibility, branding, and management with better posture. And the longer you stare at it, the more obvious it becomes. Because when you look honestly at institutions, whether corporations, government, churches, military commands, or even informal groups, genuine leadership feels rare. I don't mean positions or titles or even authority structures. Actual leadership. If someone speaks clearly or projects certainty, we assume he knows what he's doing, even when there's very little beneath the surface. But leadership isn't a personality type, it isn't charisma, and certainly it isn't branding. It's heavier than that. Real leadership isn't something pursued because one enjoys being in charge. In fact, a sign that became popular for recognizing when someone is fit for leadership is their reluctance towards the title. Because real leadership isn't a reward, it's a burden. And at its core, leadership is about order. First internal, then external. And that's where the modern conversation falls apart. So if we're going to talk about leadership seriously, we have to begin where it actually begins. Leadership begins with inner order. Before a man begins to lead others, he is already leading or failing to lead himself. This is the least visible part of leadership, which is exactly why it's the most neglected. A leader without self-command governs by mood. Decisions become reactions. Standards fluctuate. Emotions set the tempo. And the group feels the instability immediately, even if they can't articulate it. Leadership does not begin with confidence. It begins with self-control. Inner order does not mean perfection. It means alignment between values, actions, and reactions. When something goes wrong, a leader with inner order does not spiral. He absorbs pressure without losing orientation. This is why discipline appears in every serious leadership tradition. Discipline is not punishment, but it's structure. It prevents constant inner negotiation. It means the leader does not have to redecide who he is every morning. When inner discipline is absent, leaders compensate externally. They micromanage, overregulate, and apply emotional pressure. The less control a leader has over himself, the more controlling he becomes towards others. That is not authority. It is anxiety in command. And this is where we have to move from the internal to the external, because once internal order is missing, everything else begins to distort. Authority is responsibility, not privilege. The fastest way to identify bad leadership is to watch how someone treats authority. If authority is viewed as a benefit, failure is inevitable. Real authority does not lift you above responsibility. It sinks you deeper into it. Old leadership traditions understood this clearly. Authority meant accountability. More could go wrong on your watch, and when it did, excuses were not acceptable. Good leaders does not ask what authority gives them. They ask, what are they accountable for? That shift changes everything. Authority always creates loneliness. There are moments when consensus is unavailable and certainty impossible. Leaders must decide anyway, knowing the consequences attached to them personally. That burden is not a flaw in leadership. That's the price of it. When authority is treated as privilege, resentment flows. But when authority is treated as responsibility, trust emerges. And trust not titles, is the foundation of leadership. However, responsibility alone is not enough because people do not learn leadership through instruction, they learn it through example. Example is the highest form of instruction. People observe leaders far more closely than leaders realize and listen far less than they hope. Speeches about standards mean little if behavior contradicts them. People internalize what leaders tolerate and embody, not what they proclaim. From the moment authority is granted, everything becomes instruction. How frustration is handled, how absent people are discussed, and whether corners are cut when convenient. Small inconsistencies accumulate into culture. If discipline is demanded but exemptions are made at the top, standards become optional. If accountability is preached but avoided personally, blame shifting becomes acceptable. No rhetoric can unlearn those lessons. And consistent example stabilizes groups. A leader who remains calm under pressure does not need to demand composure. One who carries burdens visibly does not need to lecture about sacrifice. Leadership is not about standing above others, it's about standing in front, observing pressure first. And pressure is where the illusion of leadership dies. Leadership under pressure. Leadership is revealed under pressure, not created by it. Crisis strips leadership to its essentials. People do not look for brilliance, they look for steadiness. Panic spreads panic. Irritability creates hesitation. And hesitation forces improvisations without direction. Inner order matters most here. Leaders must be able to decide with incomplete information and accept that some decisions will go wrong. Waiting for certainty is often avoidance disguised as caution. Leadership under pressure is not theatrical. It's calm, direct, and focused. Clear priorities matter more than elaborate explanations. And there is a moral responsibility in stress. Urgency tempts leaders to treat people as expendable. Good leaders resist this while understanding that orders have human consequences, which is why accountability is necessary. And when pressure passes, what remains was not how loud the leader was, but whether trust survived. And trust survives only when power is restricted. Moral authority and the limits of power. There's a moment that every leader faces, and it's usually subtle. Something works. You push hard. You enforce something aggressively. You override objections, and the result goes your way. And that's when the temptation shows up. If it works, it's justified. That line right there has quietly destroyed more institutions than incompetence ever has. Because yes, power can produce results. You can force compliance, you can intimidate, you can overwhelm. But compliance is not loyalty, and fear is not trust. The problem isn't using power. Leadership requires power. The problem is forgetting that power needs limits. Not because someone imposed them on you, because you impose them on yourself. That's moral authority. It's when people follow you not just because they have to, but because they believe your decisions are restrained, fair, and proportionate. Restraint is underrated. In fact, restraint is often a clearer signal of strength than force. Anyone can escalate. Not everyone can stop themselves. When consequences are consistent, people relax. They know the boundaries. They know what to expect. When enforcement shifts with mood or ego, people become guarded. They start calculating instead of trusting. And once people begin calculating, the culture changes. You may still have control, but you've already lost legitimacy. And legitimacy is fragile. You don't notice it when it's there. You absolutely notice it when it's gone. That's why limits aren't weaknesses. They're the invisible structure holding everything together. And once you understand that, you start thinking less about winning arguments. and more about what kind of culture you're building, which leads to the final piece: forming leaders, not winning moments. Here's the real test of leadership. When you leave, does the place function better or worse? Bad leaders leave dependency. Good leaders leave strength behind them. This is where ego quietly sneaks back in, because there's something flattering about being indispensable, about being the one everyone needs, the one who has the answers, the one who holds everything together. But if everything collapses when you step away, you didn't build leadership, you built reliance. Leadership isn't about being the hero in every situation. It's about forming people who can think, decide, and act without you hovering over them. That takes patience. It takes explaining reasoning instead of just issuing commands. It takes letting people make small mistakes so they can avoid larger ones later. Secure leaders build successors. Insecure leaders build followers. And that difference determines whether an organization grows or stagnates. Formation matters more than motivation. Speeches fade. Habits remain. Culture remains. Leadership is stewardship. You are holding authority temporarily. You didn't invent it. You don't own it. And eventually, you will hand it off. The question is simple. Did you strengthen the structure, or did you centralize it around yourself? Because leadership isn't about standing out. It's about standing firm long enough that others learn how to do the same. And when that happens, you don't just win moments. You build continuity.